What if actions you take today might not only change the future, but rewrite the past? What if your gut was a kind of bank where wealth was stored, released, and passed on to others? What if the bacteria living inside you will influence the lives of your great-great-great-grandchildren? What if every decision we make is actually dictated by unseen forces that live in, on, and around our bodies? And is even asking that a kind of spiritual acknowledgement that there are things much bigger or even smaller than us that we can't see, but that are nonetheless real and constantly influencing our lives? Well, welcome to This Plus That, a show about connecting the seemingly unconnectable and why it matters. My name is Brandy, and I'm your host. And while I am not here today to argue the metaphysical merits of time entanglement or the existence of free will, I am someone who gets really mystical when I start talking about food. My Instagram bio actually once said, "Fermentation is my theology, shared meals my church, paradox and prose my offerings, aliveness my message." Because I just think that food is an endless source of metaphor, and microbes, microscopic organisms like bacteria, yeasts, and molds, algae, and viruses are some of life's greatest magicians and alchemists, constantly practicing the art of transformation and change, taking one thing and turning it into another. And that the art of change is something I am deeply interested in. See, Asia Dorsey is someone who practices this art every day. She's the one who originally taught me how to collaborate directly with microbes, mostly through the process of fermentation. So of course, in today's conversation, we talk about the intersections of microbes plus spirituality. Asia writes Afrofutures into existence by reweaving Black bodies into relationship with the earth through the fabric of food. She studied food and sociology at New York University, but extended her education to include public health nutrition in Accra Ghana, seed sovereignty in northern India with Vandana Shiva, and biological agriculture and ancestral nutrition with Kay Baxter in New Zealand. After healing her depression with bones, bugs, and botany, Asia took the helm of 5 Points Fermentation Company in 2016 in order to bring probiotics to the people. As a bioregional herbalist apprenticing with Herbal Elder Susun Weed, an organizational ecologist with Regenerate Change, and permaculture instructor with the Denver Permaculture Guild, Asia deciphers and reintegrates the sacred instructions of microorganisms, plants, and animals to bring the patterns of ecosystems into our people systems. You can also find her curating educational programs at the Seeds of Power Unity Farm, bone deep in soil, balancing botanical chaos long enough for her people to rise together in power and step into the wholeness that is their birthright. Some of what we talk about in this conversation includes the wild notion of sugar as healing, how our thoughts and beliefs affect the way we metabolize food, people, and everything else, microbes as spiritual impulses and deities, sanitization, inoculation, war, and allowing ourselves to be changed by the quote-unquote other, becoming that which we resist, how phases of activism follow similar ecological phases and inflammatory responses in the body, fermentation as a type of ancestral inheritance, and what ancient dairy practices teach us about generational wealth, as well as viruses as adaptation advantages, claiming both science and spirituality in all of their complexity without devaluing either, but also not ignoring each of their flaws, the beauty of not belonging, and so much more. But a few notes before we hop in. The quote I read at the very beginning is a quote from Fermentation as Metaphor by Sandor Katz. I, of course, provide a link to that in this episode's show notes, and it's definitely worth reading, as well as all of Sandor's other work. I love his stuff. You'll also hear Asia use the term microbiome multiple times in this episode. She's not mispronouncing microbiome. She's intentionally speaking to the ecosystem of viruses that are part of human life every day. I've included a few references in this episode's show notes to that as well, one of which includes the sentence, "As much as half of all of the biological matter in your body is not human." I think that's one of the most amazing sentences ever. There's also a part where Asia mentions that she wants to go back to a note I made drawing from something I read where it claimed that humans are the only mammal to drink other mammals' milk, which she said was untrue. I accidentally cut that part of this conversation. So that transition in our conversation is a bit confusing if you don't know that. So just wanted to point that out. But okay, here's the amazing interview with Asia Dorsey on the intersections of microbes plus spirituality. Our existential context is a microbial matrix. We are continually learning more about how critically important the vast microbial populations everywhere are. Not only bacteria, but also fungi, viruses, and all the others. Forms of life are not bad or good. We exist in all our co-evolved complexity, a vast matrix of intertwining life forms at different scales, interacting, mutually coexisting, and feeding off of one another in ways we are just beginning to recognize. Mutual coexistence, however perceived or not, shapes cultural evolution. And since prehistoric times, people have learned to work with invisible life forces, such as bacteria and fungi, in the context of fermented foods and beverages, as well as agricultural methods, fiber arts, animal husbandry, and more. Human cultures around the world have recognized the invisible force of fermentation in mystical ways, as reflected in the gods and goddesses and mythical figures, and the stories and ritual ceremonies found in diverse traditions. So, all that being said, I like to start these sort of with questions also related to quotes that ask you basically how you're holding complexity in your life. So there's a part in that quote from Sandor that talks about how things are neither bad nor good. So I'm wondering if there's anything in your life right now that you're learning to hold, you think, as something that's neither bad nor good.
The complexity that I hold is that I hold polarity in one hand, and nothing in the other. And so what I'm coming to recognize is that there's, in movement work, especially movement work, there's this desire for this thing called the middle ground. And so we want to really celebrate sort of hybridity and celebrate the things that are neither and both. But what's really sacred to me in these times is that power of polarity in what it means to hold really firm in a no or hold really firm in a yes. I want to emphasize the importance of the entire spectrum, and not sort of move to the sagging middle, because that place, I'm finding more power sort of holding my ground, and then in hybridity right now.
Yeah, I love that. So meaning it's not really about turning everything into like one big uniformity, but rather celebrating all of the various points along the spectrum and being able to hold all of them equally or simultaneously, I guess is more what I would say.
Yeah, it's the simultaneity of the dance, Brandy. It's really, so I just got back from apprenticing with one of my sheroes, and I've just had to hold the complexity of everything that she is and everything that she is not. The parts of her that are beautiful, the parts of her that are terrible, and everything in between. And so being this way with people, and seeing, not only that, like, maybe this isn't good, this isn't bad, but having a strong position about what your relationship to those things are without judging them, I think is a place of power for us. So irrespective of the morality of good and bad, like the choosing to be in proximity or not is a place of power for us, and the way that we make our choices on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of, so the way that I met you was because I attended a workshop of yours, because I think one day I was scrolling Instagram and I saw some graphic come up that said sacred sugar. And I thought,
Yes.
I had been on this like multi-year healing journey because I'd been experiencing all these health issues. And I thought, of all things, how does someone call sugar sacred, right?
Yes.
Because sugar, probably more than anything else in in the Western diet, has been villainized as the worst possible thing, right? Mm-hmm. And so I thought, like, at that point, especially, I had, and I said to you multiple times, I think, in sort of introducing myself to you, that I had gotten to a point where in all of the food stuff I had done, trying to figure out what I should eat, quote unquote, in order to get rid of these problems I was experiencing. And again, I'm intentionally using that language also because I think that's how I was framing it, like get rid of these problems and, you know, those sorts of things. The way that I think Western culture also looks at pain or illness in your body as a problem and not your body's healthy response to something that isn't maybe in alignment. So anyway, I've been doing all this food stuff and having all these food issues. And I had gotten to the point where things like blueberries or broccoli, like, I mean, just a whole host of things that I had been told for most of my life were healthy for you weren't healthy anymore, right? Like broccoli's bad for your thyroid. Like I was running across those things and I was just like, I genuinely at some point have no idea what to eat. And so when I saw your sacred sugar thing come up, I was like, okay, this is different than anything I've seen anyone else talking about. So I attend this workshop and you talk about how you used diet to heal your depression and your gut health issues and all of these things that I had also been experiencing. So for anyone who might be listening, who's like, I at least want to start with you getting into how sugar might be sacred. And I know that could be the entire episode, but I think it's at least, I think it sets the tone for both like a conversation about microbes and spirituality, right? Because something that's sacred, something as villainized as sugar, looking at it as sacred is such an interesting take.
Yeah. So in this space and in this conversation with, you know, the artist formerly known as Sugar, it's important to realize that what capitalism does is that it makes everything accessible. And in that accessibility, it also erases the structures, the cultures, and the traditions that held that thing in place. And so cookies, which were a celebratory food that was only baked at very special times, now become a snack that people can buy out of a vending machine at any time. Right. And so the way that our ancestors used sweets was really bound inside of beautiful forms of culture that put them in their proper place. But with the destruction of those peoples, those cultures, those traditions, sugar then gets to exist in the world right next to milk, right next to meat, right next to all the things, right? And so thinking about, the destruction of culture who teaches us how we use sugar, there's also the plant itself. And I got to meet the sugar plants, the grass in India when I was studying at Navdanya with Vandana Shiva and Satish Kumar and a whole host of amazing human beings. And while I was in India, North India, like I would see people grinding sugarcane into a juice in my jet. I was like, they just drinking sugar water. Like I had no idea of sugar cane, the history of sugar cane, but the medicinal qualities of sugar cane, and that in India and in Ayurveda, sugar cane juice is actually active against diabetes. So understanding and seeing sugar and its cultural milieu being used by the people who have cultivated the plant for centuries and have learned how to be in symbiosis with sugar. It really, I got to sit with the truth of what sugar was, and especially what sugar was before the processes of colonization and before the plantationist got hold of it and separated it into molasses and, the white sugar that we know so well. So my relationship with sugar was coming to terms with the history of the transatlantic slave trade. How I got here to this continent was largely a byproduct of sugar. And also learning about and reimagining sugar as it originally was by gathering the cultural context of folks of India and their medicine ways. Like, I was really able to see the parts of sugar that heal us, and not only that heal us physically, but that heal us on a psycho-emotional level. What does it mean to and as like white folks, what does it mean to burnish this substance that was made so important in your lineage, and to turn your back on it? People do this with wheat as well. And it's like, I feel the offense of my white ancestors. I feel the offense of mad ancestors when people like come for dairy or when they come for wheat. It's like, oh my God, how dare you? But
like, right, like potato and bread were what a lot of white ancestors were able to eat for many years. So
yeah, that connection, reconnecting the plant to place and to the people that held it, and the story and the history of it really helped me to come to term with sugar. As an herbalist and as a person who uses food as a healing modality, what's really unique about human beings, which we can't extract from, these rat tests or mice experiments, is that the human psyche and the human's relationship to the object of consumption changes the way that the body will metabolize the substances in that food. It changes the way that that food will impact the body. And so eating sugar with a story that sugar is bad is going to have a different response in your body than if you eat sugar with the story that, like, God put this here for a reason, and I'm going to value every part of this plant.
Right. And what I think I value so much about that, I mean, going back to the capitalism bit, is capitalism has a way of, what I'm hearing you say, like, it's dissecting us, like it's breaking things up into its smallest component parts, right? And then finding a way to sort of sell those in a market. And what is missing then from all of those things is the cultural context, the history, the even like you're saying, like the plant itself is broken apart from its original wholeness, right? So sugar is no longer sugarcane. It's white processed sugar without all of the fiber, without all of the minerals and all of that. So yeah, there's this this thing too about also like the way we eat and what we eat and how we eat is never devoid of how we actually think about what it is that we're eating also, right? So that in addition to the history and the culture and all of those narratives, the narrative that we have even about what we're putting in our mouth right now and what's nourishing or not nourishing to us actually affects how it gets ingested by our bodies.
It does.
So we're already getting kind of woo, right? Like we're going like the sacred, spiritual, mystical stuff that happens based on your beliefs that actually affect also how food is transformed in your body.
And I will name that this is not woo. And if it was woo, you're welcome. But I would name that this has actually been scientifically verified. We can talk about the placebo effect as well as the nocebo effect, which comes up a lot in research around so-called gluten sensitivity. And the nocebo effect describes the circumstance of people who believe that gluten will harm their body will have a response to gluten even if gluten's not in the product that they're having, right? They will psychosomatically create all of these issues because they think it's going to harm them. So the nocebo effect is scientifically verified, as well as the placebo effect. How we think about the food that we eat changes how our body responds to it.
Which makes, I mean, gosh, there's so many connections, right? Because then you go like the way that I think about people also changes how I am in relationship to people as well.
Yes.
And I want to say also that I think for anyone who has been listening for the several episodes that I have out so far, that number one, when I say woo, I mean it with all due respect and not condescendingly. And also still that I even hold in my body, I think I'm still reintegrating my story around spirituality that knows that I have sciencey people who listen and who follow my work, but who aren't into woo, quote unquote, things. And so I think I have a tendency in myself based on both my own past traumas and with spirituality, and also trying to toe the line between everyone I know who might be listening. And as I said I had a podcast episode with Tyler Thrasher, and he was like, Brandy, like you just can't make everybody happy. And I think I think part of this podcast is me still trying to do that integration work of like, I am both a lover of science and also deeply mystical and spiritual.
Yes.
And believe that those are actually, really the same thing at the end of the day. They're just different lenses we look through.
As they are. And I hear you working with the fragments of the same type of rationality and empiricism that like came from the science that created capitalism itself, right? The reductionism. Exactly. So a part of my decolonization is that I never apologize. It's that play of polarity, right? Like if I'm talking spirituality, I'm not gonna accommodate for folks who may not believe what I'm saying. And that's the sacredness of the spectrum and being able to move from that place of integration in the center, but also feeling really, really confident, right? At the far edge of the spectrum. And so I bow to you in this work because I remember what I was like when I was like, doing the both thing.
Insufferable. Yeah. It's not fun for me or anyone else, I don't think. But I mean, important. You're right though, that it's so connected to capitalism and all of our other like economic structures and all the other ways that we look at the world. But I'm thinking in order to sell something disconnected from all of its attendant parts, other parts, like its wholeness, you have to desacralize matter.
Yes. Matter
has to become unsacred in order for you to do something that's sort of profane, like making it marketable, and so I think it makes sense that, there's just this long history of the way that our economics have split the sacred from our matter. And so then of course, someone who lives in that kind of society and has grown up with those stories struggles with what it means to re-sacralize matter.
Yes.
And also not fucking apologize for it.
No apologies, babe.
No apologies.
I love that. And I love you. And I love that you brought into the context this relationship, the sacred and the profane, because a lot of my work these days are about making the profane sacred and seeing what's available within that context.
That's what's up.
Right. And it's this constant movement in all things, like, as you said, the sugar, like making the sugar sacred, but also what parts of my body have a story that they are not acceptable, like undoing fat phobia has been the heaviest oppression that I've been able to lift. Because it was invisible. I had no idea. And also undoing food culture, right? Undoing diet culture. Christy Harrison has a book called Anti-Diet, which was good, but it wasn't as good as Lando Bacon's Health at Every Size, which has really been inspiring the way that I work with bodies these days. And so finding the sacredness and not just the food, but the bodies and all the bodies that consume the food. Such a beautiful part of the work.
Yeah. Okay. Speaking of the unseen, so you're talking about fat phobia as something that's, largely invisible to you until you started doing this work. And I don't know if I'm reframing that back to you, that what you meant there, but I do think it leads into my next question, which is, sort of speaking of bodies, is what are microbes and what do they have to do with our bodies? Because those of course are also like unseen forces by our sort of naked eye.
Yeah. What are microbes? Ooh.
Can you even contain them in a paragraph?
No, I mean, especially microbes are spiritual impulses. They are the energy turned matter that causes work to happen in the world. Microbes are my favorite deities. They, what are they? It's almost a rude question to try to contain them and language.
That's like when someone asks God what he is, his only response is, I am.
I am. They are that they are. Okay. Yeah. And what microbes are can never be divorced from where they are, right? Microbes are situated in context. And so who they are for a stone may be different than who they are for me, who they are for my pencil. They are constantly becoming something else. And it's like, which microbes? I am newly, of course, obsessed with the microbiome, right? And
right.
I have a COVID altar that I nourished with elderberry, which is my body. So anyways, I'm really, this question of, what the microbes are, they're tiny invisible organisms that do amazing things. And I think they time travel. I have so much to say about.
It's okay. We've got more space, but it's so funny because when you pitched the topic of this, microbes plus spirituality, to me, I was so excited because in early pandemic, I started drafting something I wanted to write called Fermentation plus Theology, because there wasn't, and theology is a study of the divine, right? And so there's nothing to me that fermentation and microbes are not a metaphor for divinity and some sort of mystical force that's happening. Ooh. And I had started to write out all these ways that I felt like it was building a theology for me. And one of those too was also, going even back to capitalism again, not just to shit on capitalism the whole time. It's just part of the larger story, but that there's an uncontrollableness about fermentation and microbes, right? They are going to be what they are. And I can't, every time you would teach me, so I guess we didn't mention this, but after I went through your sacred sugar class, eventually you end up mentoring me in fermentation and, cultivating my own yogurt and culturing my own yogurt and that sort of stuff and herbalism. And anytime I would sort of be okay, well, how clean do I clean the glass? And what instruments do I have to have? And how do I properly do herbalism? Every time I would sort of get into that mentality, you'd be number one, Brandy, whatever's growing wild out your back door is probably exactly what you need. There's no, you don't have to buy the thing. You don't have to get all the extra special, instruments or whatever. And especially with fermentation, that you need basically what you already have, because people have been doing it that way for millennia. But there's this Oh, you even said it earlier, like the dance, right? Like it's an uncontrollable relationship that you can't put that sort of like cleanliness and sterilization on.
Yeah.
It is uncontrollable. It's unwieldy. And that's just like how life is.
It's exactly how life is. And even the attempt to control will only make them stronger. And it's the same for all oppressed people, right? It's like, when you press into something, it presses back, right? There's an equal and opposite reaction. And so any attempt to control microorganisms leads to their growth and their power, and this endless dance, right? I love it. The kitchens that have the most beneficial microorganisms and that are the least dangerous are dirty kitchens. The people who clean their kitchens with bleach and sanitize their dishes and dishwashers, you see the microbes in those environments have responded to the arms race. And so you have the largest proportions of pathogenic microorganisms in the cleanest places. That's why hospitals are so dangerous. That's why grocery stores became dangerous during COVID, because they were so hyper sanitizing. And I was like, oh, you're cultivating the worst of the worst by trying to clean it up.
Yeah. You're creating an environment for pathogens to thrive.
Yeah. And war creates that environment socially, psychologically. Oppression creates the environment for pathogens to flourish.
Right. Like we are, I mean, the war analogy is such a rife one, especially with COVID, right? Because it's like our mentality as though we're at war with a virus. And we are also at war with ourselves, like all the ways that we try to either dissect all these little pieces of ourselves. Like you were even hearing me say that I'm trying to reintegrate again in my life. So the way that we're at war with ourselves and trying to separate all of the ugly pieces from ourselves. And then how that also gets enacted out on our exterior world and all of the cleanliness and control. And we are constantly worried about invasion, right? And that scales all the way up sociopolitically, build a wall, keep immigrants out, all of that, right? It's just and again, it's going back to the way that you're saying, the way that we think about people, the way that we think about food, the way that we think about ourselves there's nothing it doesn't affect.
Yes. And the act of colonization creates a mind process that makes you hyper afraid of being invaded, because there's also the play of how opposites and polarities work, right? So it's a real trap. And some of my favorite philosophers these days, from the Black prophetic tradition, we have Bio Akomolafe, who really encourages us to examine the cracks and has us creating sanctuaries outside of this constant arms race, this struggle. And so, in thinking about creating sanctuaries with the microbiome, what's the opposite of war? Part of my practice is to inoculate new spaces with my beneficial organisms. I've been cultivating some of my cultures for over 5 years now. I've sold them commercially. I have really partnered with these microbes. So when I get into a new place, there's clean it, sage it, right? All this stuff. But I just spray it down with my microbes, right? I just inoculate it with my culture. And I know that there's going to be a dance. I know that fragments of the DNA of the microorganisms that were in the space before me are going to combine with the DNA of my microorganisms and create something brand new but perfectly suited to the environment. Like, I'm interested in sex and reproduction. Like, I'm not the colonizer that like erases everything that came before me. Like, I want to be invited to make community. And I do that wherever I go, instead of this path of destruction.
I love that too. There's, when I was drafting some writing about those connections between fermentation and theology, I was also doing really also like deeper into the pandemic, I had started doing some writing about the idea of just like hypervigilance, that we're like so constantly hypervigilant. And it was interesting because I started to run into all of these words that are really interesting, like inoculation, like you just said, that like, I had also done some reading where folks were talking about like, in order to be in community, you actually have to be inoculated. Like, something has to be let in to you.
Yes.
And so this idea that we can remain separate from each other and actually have community, like, you actually have to be willing to be inoculated with other people. And so it's so interesting watching, like, in the sort of spread of COVID, how much we were like separation, hardcore, get rid of the bacteria, the pathogens, the viruses, and do not let us be inoculated.
Yeah.
Right. And I've been reading this book too lately, that you would love if you've not heard of it. It's called Inflamed: Deep Medicines and the Anatomy of Injustice.
Ooh.
And it's talking about how colonization and all of these things like have actually, like, they are types of inflammation in our society, and they are types, like, they lead to inflammation in our bodies. And, they're talking about, and I am really not a doctor, so I cannot speak scientifically to this, but I'm just going to recall this as best as I can, which is that, like, we tend to think of our immune systems and autoimmune responses as things that are basically their job is to be at war. Like, they go into battle to fight against all of the things that are threatening invasion of our bodies, when actually they're constantly sort of going like, we're in community and how do we need to respond in community, more so than they're going, nothing can come in here.
Yes.
And our job is to make sure that everything that comes in here is killed. And literally, there's like no way I can talk about this without it sounding like immigration.
Yeah, because it is. I mean, it's, as above, so below, as within, so without. We're constantly recreating our belief systems. And I want to return to that concept of like how we were during COVID, but really the willingness to be inoculated. What's important is that concept of we have to be willing to be changed by the other in order to be okay with what the reality actually is. We are already being changed by the other. In fact, the creation of the other makes it such that who we think we are will inevitably disappear, right? This conversation of like, it's so important that we get that we are constantly becoming the other, and that we are not only becoming the other, we are becoming the bed that we sleep in. We are becoming the utensils that we use to eat. We are becoming the animals that we are consuming. We are becoming everything that we are. We are becoming COVID and trying to fight against it. We become the virus, right? Like, so
it's almost like, I was thinking too, to interrupt you really quickly, I have a former interview with Andreas Weber talking about, who wrote Matter and Desire and Erotic Ecology. And our conversation is on love plus death. And we sort of talk about the way that, like, if you spend your whole life avoiding death, your whole life actually becomes about death.
Yes.
Like like you're saying, in the very act of you trying to create an other actually makes it more part of your life than anything else.
This is actually exactly why all diets fail. Everything that yeah. So there's like secrets from the eating lab. I really am into why diet culture is a lie. So, but some of my favorite research shows that as soon as we say like, we can't have this food, everything in our body is primed to make us go after that food. And so by saying you can't have gluten or dairy or whatever, your whole life becomes about gluten and dairy. It's like vegans. They know everything about everything that an animal has ever touched, right? They become obsessed with it. And the orthorexia is the clinical name, though I don't need to make things clinical in order, whatever. But orthorexia describes a lot of us foodies who are food obsessed and healing obsessed, and our whole life becomes about sickness instead of becoming about wellness. And so again, I'm constantly asking myself, how do we get out of this arms race with being against, and where is the crack that we can fall into to find the sanctuary where we belong? And for me, it's refusing to diet, and it's moving into deep relationship with my body and her desires. But really my body is we, us, are, because it's not just my desires, it's the desires of my microbiome as well. So this is what I'm constantly asking, is that this process of even activism, right? All of these processes create more of the thing that we're fighting against. And it's subtle, but I can track it, right? Right. I can track who I become when I'm against.
Ooh. Yeah, that's, a deep part of what I've been talking about on this podcast so far also is my own history of organizing culture, and just really realizing at some point that we were reenacting the oppression that we were seeking to resist.
I had this experience with my mentor, with my heroine. She had innovated a feminist practice of herbal medicine, and it was just unflawed. And who she had become was the patriarchy. And it was so fascinating because I never had such a patriarchal experience in my life. And there was almost an inevitability, as a permaculture instructor, my favorite ways of having people understand social systems, right, is through the lens of ecology. And my favorite conversation is ecological secession, right? I believe that there's also a so ecological secession is the process by which, after the land is disturbed, there's a procession of different organisms that come about, die, and make way for another procession of organisms, all resulting in climax ecology. So this might be a prairie as a climax ecology, or a forest as a climax ecology. But there's a process of getting there. And so I think about, some of the frontline workers, our activists and things like that. They are the first people on the scene to show up after the soil has been disturbed, right? And so they have to be really quick. They have to mirror the disturbance and trying to heal it. The fire was quick, so these fire weeds have to be quicker, right? Who are going to come to heal it. But what happens in our social movements is that the first people to break the ice often become similar to the oppressors. And so, in the civil rights movements, the very first leaders were all, Martin Luther King had 2 PhDs, they were all middle class. The way that Black folks dressed themselves, it all mirrored dominant culture, because the conversation
was
of
assimilation.
Assimilation, that's right. But you fast forward to the Black Power movement, and it's actually, we're not like you, and we want our own stuff. And then you fast forward to Black Lives Matters, who is we're not like you, we want our own stuff, and we want what you have. You see that as the generations before died and really sacrificed themselves, the next generations were able to have more liberty to make better asks. So our ancestors readied the soil for us to be here, but also there was a sacrifice. And there's a sacrifice. There's something that happens when you're so close to the pain and to the problem. and what happens is that you become it. And it's up to later generations to undo your becoming and to also benefit from what you got for them. So that's one of the complexities I've really been sitting with, Brandy, is like the role of activists and, you know, how to both appreciate what they're able to do on the front line and also understand that the cost of being on the front line is becoming the problem. Okay.
So I want to go back though to, so for someone who might be listening who doesn't know what a microbiome is.
Uh-huh.
And again, I'm sure that's just as easy as describing what a microbe is. But I want to go back there just really quickly because I want to launch into more metaphors around it.
Okay. Yeah. And I'm noticing myself being squirmy about defining things, and I'm going to be okay that I'm squirming. And the microbiome is a collection of fungi, microbes, archaea, protozoa. It's really, there's other language like the hollow biome, but really it's just it's your inner ecosystem. It's all the beings in your inner ecosystem. And it's all the small beings in your inner ecosystem, and what they are up to, you know, becomes what you're up to. And they are all not only responding to your will, but they are responding to the external environment around you, including the weather. They're also responding to internal cues, right? So if you're a menstruating person, your microbiome is going to change with your cycle. And so they're a community of beings that are in call and response with everything around them that ultimately shape who it is that we are and who it was that our ancestors were and who our progeny will become. And so they are the life stuff that lives inside of us.
Yes. And that mention of the progeny that, the mention of what our progeny will become is fitting for where I want to go next, because I mean, let's reclaim dairy for a second, because you mentioned dairy a second ago, and there's a piece that we've both read that is about microbes and dairy practices in Mongolia.
Yes.
And there's this part in it that says that Mongolians call their starter cultures a word that essentially translates to mean wealth or inheritance. And that they pass down their starter cultures from generation to generation. So it's actually an inheritance.
Yes.
And it's literally rich in metaphor.
Yes.
Meaning there's a ton of metaphor you can make from it, but even just speaking about that language, inheritance and wealth, it's not just like they look at literally the culture itself as the starter culture as a thing that they're passing down as a wealth. But then of course they're also passing down their gut microbiomes to their children. And then those children pass it on to their children. And so there is literally a gut inheritance that they're passing down.
Yes.
So yeah, I want to hear you talk about dairy for a second. It's just a completely open-ended question. Asia, just talk about dairy.
Just talk about dairy. First of all, my body is undeniably female, and I cannot wait to make cheese from my breast milk. So I'm so ready. I can't wait. Oh my gosh. So milk is like one of the most important features of our species. We're literally mammals. Like we're literally named after lactation.
Dairying actually goes back 5,000 years and was practiced 4,000 years before the emergence of a mutation that allowed lactose digestion. And dairy products were among the earliest manufactured foods. So like dairy is not a modern technology. Right?
No.
It's an ancient practice, dairying.
Dairying, the symbiosis with animals that comes from dairying, right? Only certain cultures like decided or had the right conditions to be in relationship with animals in that way. And I do want to return to, no, one of the coolest features of being a mammal is that like any animal can suckle from any animal. And what's particularly fascinating about the nipple, about the tite, is that it could actually read the microbiome of the mouth that's on it and change its production capacity to accommodate the needs of the consumer. And so I can have 2 different babies on each of my titties, and each one will produce a different milk according to what that baby needs. And so if I suckled from a cow or from a lamb, from any other lactating animal, it would produce the exact milk that I needed. Okay, titties are universally awesome. As
a queer woman, I have no disagreement.
Yes. Praise the titties. And it's so important, right, that like male and female bodies can produce milk. And so it's been preserved in both sexes, all the sexes, I'm sure, because it's so important. So there's a conversation about milk. I can talk about milk and sexism. I can talk about vegans and all the things.
I mean, I want to hear you just riff, I think, on that like inheritance piece, right? Because I think there's something spiritual about that inherently also, right?
Well, it's part of the strangeness of microbial reproduction. Horizontal gene transfer is the ability of microorganisms to share genetic information like at will, instead of having to pass down genetic information from one generation to the next. Microbes can take the genetics from a dead microbe and incorporate it into their DNA, right? And so this conversation about epigenetics that we have as humans, which is we have a certain suite of genes that will turn on and off according to environmental conditions. Microorganisms can be thought of, or a culture, like a yogurt culture that's been passed down, can be thought of as a bundle of epigenetics, because each generation, those yogurt cultivars are changing, they're learning lessons about the environment and adapting, making the right adaptations. And so by the time the next generation gets that yogurt cultivar, it has all the knowledge that other generation has fed into it. And that's really passing
It's exactly
down.
What you were just saying about activists also.
Yes, it's all happening in this beautiful procession. I truly believe that the children that we will have, the children that we will be aunties to or uncles to, or however we decide to play that game, that each generation, the children are getting more intelligent, right? Because of the lineages that they are inheriting. And so there's a simultaneity though, right? Like, for example, I am a soft woman. My grandma and my aunties and my family were hardcore AF because they were in the struggle, but they created this safe container for me to be cultivated in a way that didn't need to respond to violence. And so I inherited the benefits of their struggle, right? And yet I still get to be soft and have all these different possibilities and capabilities. And so, so milk in this Mongolian culture and passing down cultures. I love that we're talking about Mongolia, because most people don't associate Asians with milk, but also know that this happened in every single culture around the world that had ferments. And rather it was the actual ferment or the vessel of fermentation that got passed down. So for example, the palm wine is one of the fermented beverages of West Africa and the Yoruba people and all sorts of folks. But what got passed down was the vessel that the palm wine was cultured in, right? Mm-hmm. And it had the ashe, like it had the spirit of the palm wine in it. But you and I know that what was in there were the cultures, right? and that every generation you're getting passed down the cultures, which in and of themselves are changing in response to the environment. They're all learning. In fact, that's what viruses are. Like, I don't want to get into the microbiome, but just know that like viruses are one of God's way of making sure that we get the update, right? There's a software. No, I don't want to use a technological metaphor. We're too good for that. But just know that like this conversation about learning is really what the microbiome is all about. Its whole purpose is to learn so that it could serve us better.
Yeah. Okay. So 2 things. One is that I think fermentation also, and studying gut health and microbiomes, was the first time I ever felt like, for me as a white woman, that the idea, the 7 generations principle that you always hear from indigenous cultures was so real. Like it became very applicable because, and it was like also that sort of like time isn't linear sort of deal. And like my gut is in this moment, in this space and time, reaching all the way back 7 generations of gut health, or gut microbiome, and then 7 generations forward, and also constantly in relationship with those things. And those things, like you said, my gut, just like those wine containers, are like, it's learning based on its environment, even though it has microbes from way back. Right?
Yes.
So there's that. And then I want you to expand more, if you can, on viruses and making sure that we're getting updates without having to go into the software piece of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes. And it's important to know that whiteness is a byproduct of capitalism. And it's important to know that, white indigenous people were defeated the way that brown and black indigenous people were defeated by wealthy capitalists in Europe. Okay. So, so of course, y'all had 7 generations, right? Like we all did, because that's how you survive, is knowing that like you have to go back and forth through time and make those considerations.
Right. The Irish and the Romanians and the Russians, like those folks were all those things before they were white in America.
Yeah. And they still are. Right. And like there are lineages in Europe that haven't been destroyed. Right. So it's important to get that this particular erasure, it's like capitalism was an antibacterial pill trying to clear the microbiome of its memory. Right? Like that's what whiteness is. It's like, we're going to clear you out.
Metaphor.
But it's a lie. And let's talk about like viruses and how viruses are also a response to stress and trauma. So what happens is that the earth is constantly sending up, and microbes themselves. It's a lot. And I'm trying to make sure that I have the language correct. But
it doesn't have to
there are little bundles of genetic information called exomes that get sent out. These little bundles are like viral, like particles that are able to respond to the worry calls, right? So the whole earth is it sounds so silly to say, but the whole earth is alive, right? The microbes that are responding in us are also responding in the soil. And so the microbes of the grass that are being cut are sending out genetic bundles of information to try to warn each other or warn future generations of how they can actually adapt to the harm that's coming to them. And the way that these information bundles get transmitted is through viruses. Viruses are just bundles of information, but they got that information in response to stress. Huh? Chemical agriculture is stressful. And so all the microbes that are on that plantation, all the plants are sending out viruses and stress signals that hopefully will help the beings surrounding them to adapt and respond to that stress. The places where the most viruses are being created are going to be the places that have the highest amount of environmental stress. And so pig farms, right? Factory CFOs, like these places where the earth is being ravaged, like everything there is, it's screaming. A virus is a scream, right? And the scream, though, is so powerful because the way our body responds to the scream is going to be our immune system. Some immune systems, right, are well acclimated and can take in the scream and get the message and adapt rapidly. Some bodies will respond to the scream as enemy and try to deconstruct it, right? So, and this is all a conversation of how we respond to getting a virus, right? Some of us immediately incorporate the genetic information. There's a huge amount of our DNA that's actually viral inclusions, including the placenta itself came from a virus. So these genetic bundles of information update our genetics with the new, latest, greatest technologies to help us to adapt. So, so I couldn't avoid the technology metaphor, just like I can't avoid being a daughter of this empire. So it's fine.
Well, I mean, I think part of what I love, and it's in my conversation with her, and one of your real loves, your baes, is Kendra Kruger. And Kendra is someone who always continues for me to take me back to the idea that technology is basically anything that helps anything be easier. And so it's not necessarily just like the computer driven world that maybe you're referring to, but also like a spoon or a pencil and that sort of thing. And that always, it makes technology feel better in my body. But I was going to say that book that I was telling you about, that Inflamed Deep Medicine and the Anatomy of Injustice, there's a couple quotes from it that I think really relate. One of them is, that cells have developed mechanisms to resist viruses, but there are no living species without viruses. And viruses can bring about adaptive biological change. They are estimated to cause almost 30% of the adaptations and proteins that humans have in common with other mammals. Viruses that fly under the radar long enough to incorporate their genetic material into host cells can give rise to new phenotypes, making for a survival advantage.
Absolutely. And it's important to know that the microbiome is thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, billions of times larger than the microbiome. We are virus. It's so cute that like we've isolated like 5, like, oh, this one causes strep throat or this is SARS. It's like, how many viruses there actually are? There are so many all the time.
So many.
So, and it's beautiful that this is how God works, right? God is constantly trying to give you the thing. Like God is always outside of your door. God is so close, constantly trying to support you. Like this is so beautiful to be a part of this world where it's viruses who come into our body and teach us different ways of being, but also the places where people are kind to the earth, right? They're probably not going to have as huge of a viral load because things aren't stressed out, right?
Well,
so it's
not just, I feel like also it's important to say though that stress in folks, it doesn't just happen in situations where people aren't just kind to the earth. Because I think, right, like indigenous cultures who might be really in tune with the earth and treating the earth pretty darn well also might have higher instances of viral load because they are environmentally stressed in other ways. Poverty, social capital, like connection to other things that give them proper support in the world. So yeah, it's like a sort of multi-dimensional factor of like what causes stress.
Yes.
And stress itself also being an inflammation. So it is, you know, like that book's talking about, like where there is stress, it is inflamed.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Stress is not bad.
Right.
Right. Stress is.
Yeah. Typically we have an adaptive response. Like we're meant to have an adaptive response to stress, not constant hypervigilance.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess maybe like, yeah. Like I was saying earlier, I think a lot of what I've talked about so far in interviews has been a way that I feel like I haven't necessarily fit. And part of that has been of my own doing and what I've learned in the narrative I learned or placed on myself, but like the ways that I don't fit in particular places. And I'm wondering if some of these thoughts and opinions of your own might have at any point made you feel like you didn't fit in some particular way, or like maybe you face rejection because of the way that you see these things.
No, I learned early on that there's something really beautiful about not belonging. And you know, my way about going about the world is very simple. Like, be your whole self as powerfully as you can, and that will select for the people that you want to have around you and those that you don't. Yeah. Right. And so like you will send out your microbiome, and some microbiomes will be compatible with yours and some won't. And who you are creates a frequency. It creates a specific resonance that will either draw people towards you or away from you. And so the music that you make is also composed of your microbes, right? Like who they are is going to change the way that you smell. It's going to change the way that you sound. It's going to change how you feel to other people. And not belonging, you find your sanctuaries. You find the people who are sanctuary for you, and you belong to them. And for everything else, there's not much you can do about it, right? Like, indeed. There's, you know, I failed organic chemistry 3 times. And I failed because I was like, this is a lie. And I don't actually, you know, like, I don't belong here. Like, this is not how I'm going to make my way. And I'm so grateful for those failures, because I became a brilliant medicine maker by ignoring everything that I learned from OChem, because it was all wrong. It was perfect for a laboratory, but it was the opposite for in situ, like in the real world, in vivo. And that was a fascinating thing to discover about power and authority.
Yeah.
And what I'm really interested in, Brandy, is so I come from, right, like African traditions, and part of our traditional medicine ways, our traditional spiritualities include ancestral reverence. And often that comes in the form of an altar, a place where we set up to really cultivate specific spiritual energy. Sometimes that's an ancestral altar, or it's an altar for specific deities. But the way that I work in the world is that, like, my body is the altar, right? My body, every single one of my ancestors lives inside of my genetic code. They're not actually out there somewhere. They're actually inside of me. And so to honor my ancestors, I honor my body. And to honor my body, I honor my microbiome. And I will, instead of cooking, like, you know, the ancestral foods and putting it on the altar, like, I make sure to incorporate my ancestors' foods into my diet on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. And it's in that way that I'm actually training and cultivating the same microbes that my ancestors had. And through that, becoming more like them. And so it's just when we're thinking about like spirituality, there's this desire to make it abstract and to make spirits other and far away. But I have been really cultivating the power of my ancestors by literally feeding and cultivating the microbes that they had inside of their bodies with their traditional foods.
Yeah. So what are you, what are you working on right now? Like what projects are you doing right now?
Yeah. So a lot of my attention is going towards book writing. Mm-hmm. I'm writing a book on the people's medicine movement. And so how do we practice herbal medicine in a way that's simple, safe, and powerful, so that we can actually spread it as a social movement outside of traditional forms of education? And so how do we be radically simple, and how do we use communications technologies in order to spread herbal information faster and more accurately? And so this book is a really beautiful community supported process. It's supported through like my Patreon, and I have folks who contribute to the writing of this book by reading chapters and sending me suggestions, trying out the instructions and letting me know what was unclear. So it's this beautiful collaborative process with my community. And I am so thrilled to be doing this work, because part of it is being able to study with different elders in the herbal movement and really learning from them and hearing their stories. So that's one project, my book project. We are developing the social permaculture course. Of course, that's been going on for years now, but really
Regenerate Change, right?
Regenerate Change, and my co-facilitators, Adam Brock and Carolyn Savory. And so we are innovating on ways to merge ecosystem with people system, to really start to develop the worlds that we want to see, because the parts of nature that we interact with the most frequently are often other people. Your dog is nature, your roommate is nature, right? So how do we apply the learnings from the natural world to the natural world that's inside of our house? Other projects,
you have a podcast, right? Or you're at least participating in a podcast?
I do. Me and my best friend, Karina Des Rosas, we have a podcast called the Petty Herbalist Podcast. And it's one of our friendship projects. We are bougie aunties, and we are, each episode we're getting bougie about a different topic in herb or medicine. And so like we get bougie about green juices or like milk or just like whatever topic in food. And, the goal is really to demystify diet culture and knowledge about food and plants to help people to discern what's actually going to serve them and what's just commodity culture. And so it's great because it's a takedown podcast, but we're both non-dualist. And so it's this like complexity of like us saying no to things while simultaneously not making them wrong. So it's like, it's a fascinating dance. I don't know if we're two-stepping or three-stepping, but at the end of the day, it's all love. So it's beautiful.
I listened to the supplements one.
You can't supplement the truth.
You can't supplement the truth. Yeah. So fascinating. Yeah. Just as someone who's been on like a decade-long health journey. Yeah. I mean, I've been through all of that, right? Supplements, green juice, getting rid of dairy, all of those things, and yeah, it's just continually so liberating to me to know you as someone who helps me, not paint any of those things as good or bad. Like I started this conversation with, that it's maybe if anything, it's less a good or bad, and it's more like helping me, reintegrate those things into my life in a way that feels true to me and what my body is calling for, and to not paint any of them as like evil, right? Like the sacred sugar thing. So, So is there anyone that you know of that's really inspiring you in terms of mashing seemingly unconnectable things together right now? It's like teaching you maybe some liberation.
Yeah, I'm in love with an indigenous, a Pueblo woman named Tiffany Lovato. And I got to have dinner a few nights. We went to an Indian restaurant, like Indian, and it was cute because we wanted to go to the American indigenous restaurant, but they were closed. So I was like, let's laugh about it. But she's been so influential in critical race theory for me. She introduced this concept of the covenant that Black and Indigenous people have, and how Indigenous people on the East Coast saw the slaves, the enslaved folks coming, and saw the shackles and the ships, and that they made preparation. And the intention, right, was that the Africans that arrived here would become a part of those tribes through blood, and we would just become each other. And that was disrupted, of course, intentionally by blood quotas and the one drop rule, which are literally opposites, but they accomplish the same thing, right? Which is to keep Indigenous bloodlines from being able to flourish, right? To try to keep them static, when the nature of blood is that it shifts and it changes and it grows and it responds. So her like telling me that really had me digging deep into the early Virginia settlements and the maroon communities that were there, the early examples of mestizaje, and has really had me formulate philosophies around like, what is it that the blood wants, which is different than what it is that the politics wants, right? The blood desires diversity. The blood wants to merge, right? The blood wants to create and reflect and to gather and to separate and to come back. And the will of the earth is different than the will of the humans who are trying to extract from her. And what is this interplay? How is it that we ended up in this country with all of these diverse bloodlines? And what is happening as we like give in to the will of the earth, and what becomes of our bloodlines? And so, my work as an herbalist has been around bioregional adaptation, because I believe that if we eat the food of the land, that we will adapt to it. And this is true, but the biggest lesson that I got was that like adaptation through time, like evolution, is also important. You really want to adapt to the land. Your progeny needs to have bloodlines that come from that land, right? Real adaptation is happening over time span. So Tiffany Lovato is my favorite. she's an indigenous herbalist. She's grounded in not separating spirituality from medicine, and really like holding sacred the fact that everything is one thing and that it's not a bunch of different pieces. And so I just really honor her as one of my favorite teachers right now.
Yeah. I was going to say, as you were talking, I was just thinking like, it's interesting because in my own life, I feel, I was saying earlier that I'm going through a process of reintegrating like the woo and the spirituality with the rest of me. But I think what's funny is that like really, in truth, that's public. This is just like the first time I've had to publicly talk about things. And so I feel myself more so like sort of trying to navigate how I want to talk about it. And it's not really a thing I want to do, like the sort of holding back of, I don't really want to live any of my life holding back any of who I am, but like personally, privately, and not really privately, but with people who know me, the spirituality is really the deepest part of who I am. I actually remember being in a class with Adam Brock and doing some of the early social permaculture stuff. And, Kendra Kruger asked everyone to be like, what's the, if you could have someone ask you anything, what's the question you wish they would ask? Sort of like a way of asking, like, how do you ever not feel seen? Like, what do you wish someone would ask you about that you never get to talk about? And my answer is always like the spiritual part of things, because it's like, growing up in the South and whatever, it's like never left me, it's felt like it's always been the core part of who I am. And now I'm not really leading you anywhere. I'm just sort of telling you that, like, I'm just realizing sort of as we're talking and you were, talking about Tiffany, that it's less of a project of integration personally and more publicly, I guess. Is it like, I'm like, how do I talk about this? And also it's the first time I've ever really had to care publicly, how do I talk about these complex things in myself and not separate them and hold them all in their fullness without devaluing any of it, the science and the spirituality and the food and every other part of my story.
I love seeing this crack in the foundation of your respectability politics, Brandy.
Yeah. I mean, it makes so much sense because I'm also like personally, I think getting to a place like it just, it's one of those things where you go like, once you crack one thing, it's cracking everything else. And so I think for me at 40, I've done all of this work in my own trauma and my own personal history and all the ways that I've experienced rejection or trauma or what have you. And I think doing something publicly is really something that forces you to get into a place, or that you're only able to get to a place of doing something publicly and not really caring about respectability politics once you finally actually belong to yourself enough to not give a shit what anybody else thinks.
Once you actually belong to yourself enough to not give a shit about what anybody thinks, like, whew, that was a word, Brandy. Like, yo, you're coming. Like, you are coming. And yes, like, I want you to come through. Like, and I want you to also acknowledge that we, as women, as queer women, as women who have experienced marginalization as humans, we cultivate these respectability politics for a reason. It's an important strategy.
It's a survival adaptation.
It's a survival adaptation, and it's an adaptation that works and that has brought us results.
Yep.
Right. And so respectability politics aren't wrong.
Not exactly the results I ever hoped they would be, right? It's always like, it's less than I ever wish they were, but results of some kind nonetheless.
It's like, I got this fancy job that I hate.
Right.
Because I was so it's like, there is a sweet spot that once you hear the sound of your own drum, like the universe responds as well. And make sure that you don't fall off. So there's something there, and this is the work, right? Like, this is the work.
Yeah, that's the joke I keep telling people, is that like I started this thing sort of under my own pretense of being like, well, interestingly, I've always been interested in mashing weird things together. Like my whole life I've done that. And once I started doing this, I was like, oh shit, this is actually about me creating a container to heal all my own like disintegration, like that I'm creating a way for me to reintegrate all of these things. And at the same time, of course, like, because I'm having to publicly be like, here's my work, here's my art, it naturally means that I'm also getting to a place of being like, I don't give a shit what your opinion is. This is my truth. And I trust myself enough to know that I've worked through it enough, and I'm a person in the world who cares deeply about others and community and all of those things. And if you take that, you're going to hear me and take it in your own particular way, in your own particular lens. And I can be a monster in your world if you need me to be, but I hope not for the people who need to hear that. But it became really quickly personal to be like, oh, this was me thinking it was something else, and realizing later that it was actually probably God, because God is everything, right? That like God was like, oh, this is the next phase on your journey, is like everything is going to be about like stepping into that like sense of belonging in yourself.
Yes. It takes me back to when I was first an herbalist, when I was a little baby herbalist, and I didn't want people to see me harvesting medicine because I didn't want them to think that I was a witch or that I, was doing something weird.
Yeah.
But I drew a lot of power from a line in a Kendrick Lamar song, which was, I speak to God in public. I speak to God in public. I read my rhymes and couplets. And I was like, King Kendrick. But it was like, I took that on. Like, what would it be like to speak to God in public? And for me, God is the earth. So I spoke through my practice of wildcrafting, and I didn't care who saw me. And I would sit with my linden tree at Sloan's Lake, and I would cry with her, and all the people at the park would walk by and see me like being in love with my tree. Like I was in love with this tree. And part of becoming who I am now was allowing myself to be seen speaking to God in public. So I just want to share that, like, what you're expressing is speaking so deeply to my soul and to my experience. And I am so glad that like you were getting this, and that you are seeing what it is for you, and moving to this place of like this coming out process. Because of the patriarchy, we have to come out of the closet about understanding that the world is not a bunch of separate parts. And it's important that we're able to come out in this way, because there are so many of us who doubt, right, the sciences that we learned and the narratives that they perpetuate, but feel that we will be shamed for feeling this way. And part of undoing that shame has constantly been honoring Black, Indigenous, female people who have always held these views, even when it was seen as backwards or whatever. It's like, like, nah, I'm joining my ranks. Like, let me join all the women that were burned and hung and drowned for speaking to God in public.
Yeah.
Right.
And also that there's a reality to that like there is a real likelihood in all of us stepping into our power, that it comes with the potential for, like what happened to witches and maybe in a different way, but
we are the grandchildren of the feminists who made a way for us to be here, like Louisa Tish, right? Like, it's because of the work of the second wave feminists and the spirituality movements in the 70s that folks like you and I can talk openly about, because we are still a part of that procession. So they are not going to burn us, but we have in our epigenetics, we have in our microbiome, the memory of being burned, and it keeps us quiet, and it keeps us domesticated, and it keeps us not fully being ourselves, because that blood memory is real. But it's important to acknowledge the sacrifice of the women, and it was women who really spearheaded the women's the spirituality movement, who did take that. Like Louisa Tish, also from Louisiana, like her family, her church, when she wrote her, like one of her first books, I think was Jambalaya, they all like turned their back on her. She lost love. She lost community for.
That's really not what I mean though, right? Is that like burning today looks like getting cut out of community?
Yes, but that doesn't happen to us because we inherited that social movement. So we're safe. Yeah. They already sacrificed. They built the soil for us to be here. Like, so we don't have to work. Like, it's different for us. The world is different than what their world was. And definitely, you know, the women and the folks of the 70s, their world is markedly different from the women of the 1770s, right? The world is becoming more beautiful because of the sacrifice of our ancestors. Every generation, they're being a little bit louder, a little bit more honest, right? And then they're making a way for folks like you and me to show up. I presented at a conference with all scientists at the University of Boulder, University of Colorado at Boulder, talking about spirituality to to all these PhDs. And like, I got rounds of applause because the world is different now. And there is a space for us to come out about what we believe to be true. Yeah. And it's integrated. So I'm studying Archimansia, my new favorite microorganism. And because of the integration, I was trained in Western schools. I know how to do scientific research. I know if a study is valid or not. And so I'm able to learn about Archimansia from all of these researchers, point out all of their flaws, and then practically implement steps in my everyday life to cultivate that specific spirit. Yeah. And that's what integration looks like. I'm not rejecting science. Yeah. I can see the flaws of it, right? And then I just live my life like it's just like, this is the best. Yeah, it's so I get to have it all.
So good. We get to have
I don't have to get rid of anything.
Yeah. Well, if I am in a process of continuing integration and being in more community with myself, then it is at least in part because I have been in community with you. And it has been, of course, such an evolving, lovely pleasure to be in relationship with you. So thank you for being here for this conversation and all the conversations we've previously had, and hopefully all the ones that we'll continue to have, and how that will grow and change both of us in the process.
Oh, they can't see that I'm crying. Oh, it's so mutual, Brandy. And I just want to bow to your growth and to your process. And I'm so excited to be here for the ride. And thank you for this invitation.
You're so welcome. Of course, the feeling is equally mutual. Bowing to you, friend. So yeah, thanks so much. Okay, it's probably pretty obvious to you how much Asia and I totally adore each other by this point, but I hope that after hearing that conversation that you also have fallen in love with Asia and her brilliant, beautiful brain, and that you will go find her online at all of her places and support all of her things. I've included all of the links to her, like her website at bonesbugsandbotany.com. That's all spelled out, bonesbugsandbotany.com, and her Patreon, where you can help support not only her ongoing work, but specifically her book work right now that she's working on, and her Instagram and everything else. So please go find those, subscribe, support her. Show notes for every episode, of course, can always be found on my site at thisplusThat.com/episodes. There's one other thing in this conversation also where Asia brought up that lyric that she thought was from Kendrick Lamar. And I believe that's actually a line that says, "I speak to God in public. He keep my rhymes and couplets," a line from Blessings, a song from Chance the Rapper. Other than that, as always, thanks to the team at Upfire Digital for my audio processing. You can find them online at upfiredigital.com. All of my music is by I can't talk today. We're going to go with it. Okay. So all of my music is by the folks at slip.stream. You can find them online at that same address. And you can find me online at thisplusThat.com, like I said, and thisplusThatPod on Twitter and Instagram. Offline, I want to acknowledge that the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute tribes are the original stewards of the land where I record these conversations, and I recognize the history and displacement of those indigenous tribes and nations who call Colorado home, as well as the Black labor forcibly used to work that land in the wake of that displacement. But if you'd like to continue following me online and follow this podcast, please, of course, subscribe to the show, rate it, review it. I think I heard that Spotify just added a rating star system or something. So please go do that wherever you listen. It's super useful to the show. I also would love if you just enjoy these kinds of mashups and especially vulnerable sharing of my own life and insights I'm finding in my own world. Please go sign up for my newsletter, and you're going to get usually about twice monthly essays from me where I do some mashups and share also links to things that I have really loved recently of other people, ideas, and things that are mashing other things together in really cool ways. My last newsletter was on gravity plus choices. It's the way that our language and the way that we talk about gravity and the things that are important to us actually shape the way that we make decisions. So that was super interesting. So go sign up for that. You can do that on thisplusThat.com, of course. And I also recently started a text community, which I would love for you to join. I think I'm going to continue doing it, but it's one way that I get to actually engage with y'all in a more one-on-one basis. So you sign up, but neither one of us sees our actual phone numbers, but I get to text you and you can even respond to me. And it's one way that I'm actually sending shorter things that I'm able to do in my newsletter or in this podcast. Of course, this takes a lot of production and time and planning and all of those things. And even my newsletters take an awful lot of time. So I'm enjoying being able to engage with people in a text community, which is really fun. I share things I'm reading, stuff I'm being inspired by, voice memos to talk to you about something I'm considering. So yeah, I would love for you to do that. You can do that also on my site. There's a link. One of the top navigation pages is mutual aid. And there I offer opportunities to either support me monthly, give me a tip for this work if you really are grateful for this. But everybody gets, even if you support me monthly, you get all of the same content. I only want you to pay me or to pass money my way or resources my way of any kind as a gratitude to me, because I love operating in the gift and feeling like this is something that I'm giving to the world. And if it's something that inspires you and makes you feel an abundance of gratitude and you feel resources and you feel like you're resourced and you have something to give to me, then I would love that. But I also offer a kind of mutual aid, which is something I call Pick My Brain. So if you ever just want to talk to me about creativity and business and marketing and branding, I'm so happy to gift that time to you in, the spirit of the gift. And if you're inspired to pay me for that or to pay it forward to someone else or to just take that as something that you need because you're in a period where you just need right now, then I would love for you to book a call with me there as well. I'm not a professional coach. I'm not a professional therapist for sure. But I do love giving my time because I used to be a branding and marketing professional full time. So if you ever want to take advantage of those resources, please know that I love talking to other creatives and seeing how we can inspire each other to continue doing more of the work that makes us come alive. And I believe that's actually what is going to change the world, and that we're dying without your gift. So I'm very inspired to help you figure out how to continue making that more and more of a reality so that you can make a living doing what you love and impact other people. So yeah, go find all that at my site. You get it. You know where to find things. You know where to find me. But I would love you to sign up for more of those things because I just love being in community with all of you in more and more ways. And yeah, just considering all these big life questions together. So thanks for being in that question or in these questions with me and Asia today. I love what Asia makes me think about and all of the alchemy that she produces in my own life. And I hope that she has now helped you think about other things in new ways, and that alchemy is now, I don't know, that things are transforming in you in your own life after hearing that. So thanks for tuning in. This is This Plus That, a show about connecting the seemingly unconnectable and why it matters. And until next time, enjoy mashing weird things together and seeing what insights come from it.